Each hour seemed crafted to sap every ounce of energy I had. Meeting after meeting blurred together, stretching endlessly, each one leaving me more drained than the last. When that final meeting wrapped up, I practically flew out of the conference room and headed straight for the parking lot. By the time I reached my car, my mind was a foggy haze, too exhausted for clear thought. All I knew was that I needed to get home. Around midnight, the city streets were unusually quiet as I finally pulled onto the main road. The crowds had vanished, leaving only flickering neon signs and pools of light beneath the street lamps. I hit the gas, watching the last city lights fade behind me. The exhaustion pressing down on me was almost overpowering, but the thought of my own bed kept me going. As the city faded into the distance, the streets began to open up, stretching into long, dark ribbons of empty road. The lights grew sparse, with only the occasional flicker from a rural gas station or the glow of a solitary farmhouse window in the distance. I hadn't driven this way often, and as the familiar landscape of buildings and storefronts gave way to stretches of dark fields and dense woods, I felt the isolation settle around me. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, like a long, winding path through a vast, empty world that belonged only to me in the dark. The highway stretched on, endless and empty, and a part of me wondered how long I'd been driving. It felt like hours, but it was hard to tell for certain. The vast stretches of road and the pitch-black night seemed to distort time, stretching it out in strange ways. Every so often, I'd see a distant set of headlights, maybe a lone trucker or someone else making their way through the night, but they were few and far between. Most of the time, I was completely alone, with only the dim glow of the dashboard and the narrow beams of my headlights cutting through the darkness. The hum of the engine grew louder in the quiet, the steady vibration of the car feeling almost hypnotic. My mind began to wander, slipping into strange, fleeting thoughts that felt like fragments of dreams. I thought about the meetings earlier in the day, the dim fluorescent lights, the endless numbers and charts. I thought about my desk, the mess of papers I'd left behind, the coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. The images blurred together, slipping in and out of focus, merging with the shadows around me until I wasn't entirely sure if I was dreaming or awake. Then, almost like an answer to a prayer, a sign came into view: Willowbrook Inn 1 mile. It seemed almost too perfect, as if it had appeared just for me. There was no town around, no gas station or diner nearby, just this single lonely inn. Inside, the place was eerily quiet. The air felt heavy and smelled faintly of mildew. There was no one at the front desk, though a small bell sat there, covered in a layer of dust thick enough to reveal several fingerprints. I rang it once, the sound echoing down the hallway in a hollow, metallic way that made me shiver. After a moment, a woman appeared from a door behind the counter. She moved slowly, as though each step took a concerted effort. Her clothes looked dated, and her skin was almost translucent, so pale that I could see faint blue veins at her temples. Her eyes, dark and deeply set, met mine, and for a moment we just stared at each other. "Do you have a room available?" I asked, my voice sounding odd and muffled in the stillness. "Room 214, she murmured, barely above a whisper. She handed me an old-fashioned key with a heavy brass tag that bore the number in faded letters. Her hand lingered on it for just a moment too long, her fingers pale and cold against mine. I took the key and mumbled a thank you, already feeling the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Something about her gaze was unsettling. She watched me as I turned to the stairs, her eyes following me until I was out of sight. The second floor was dimly lit, with old, flickering sconces along the walls. The carpet was threadbare in spots, revealing the cracked wooden floor beneath, and a faint musty smell permeated the air. I passed door after door, all identical, until I reached room 214 at the very end of the hall. Inside, the room was as outdated as the rest of the inn. As I lay down, though, a strange unease settled over me. I told myself it was just my tired mind getting the better of me, but every sound, the faint creaks in the walls, the rustle of something in the corner, seemed amplified. I could even hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears, quick and irregular. At some point, I drifted into a restless sleep, only to wake up multiple times, each time with the sensation that someone was standing nearby, just out of sight. I would sit up, flick on the light, and find only emptiness, the shadows undisturbed. Then, in the dead of night, I was jolted awake again, drenched in cold sweat. The clock read 2:47 a.m., and the air in the room was freezing. I shivered, clutching the thin blanket around me. Then I heard a faint shuffling sound from the hallway outside. I froze, straining to listen, and the sound grew louder, inching closer, until it stopped right outside my door. I froze, every muscle tense, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, there was silence. And then the doorknob turned. I felt my blood run cold as the knob twisted back and forth, as though someone were testing it. I watched, unable to move, as it jiggled softly in the dark. After a moment, the movement stopped, and I heard soft footsteps receding down the hall. I waited, holding my breath, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I was frozen, caught between terror and a twisted sense of curiosity. That was it. I couldn't stay in this place another second. I grabbed my things, threw on my coat, and practically ran down the stairs, barely noticing the creepy silence that had settled over the lobby. But as I reached for the door, I froze. Standing just outside, illuminated by the dim glow of a street lamp, was the woman from the front desk. Her eyes were fixed on me, cold and lifeless, her expression completely blank. She looked almost pleased. I pushed open the door and hurried past her, not daring to look back. My hands were shaking as I climbed into my car, but as soon as I turned the key in the ignition, I felt a strange, suffocating weight settle over me. As I drove down the empty road, an unsettling sensation crept over me, growing stronger with each passing mile. Glancing into the rearview mirror, I kept catching glimpses of movement as shadows slipping across the back seat, a fleeting flicker that vanished when I looked closer. I tried to shake it off as exhaustion, but a heavy dread settled in, refusing to let go. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I was drained, disturbed, and running on fumes. I stumbled inside, locked the door, and collapsed onto the couch, feeling too shaken to even make it upstairs. Sleep never came. The air felt thick, charged with an unnatural stillness that I couldn't explain away. I told myself it was all in my mind, yet every nerve in my body screamed that something was wrong. I'm not alone. I know that now. Whatever pale figure I glimpsed in that hotel lobby, those empty eyes fixed on me, it's here. It's watching. And every night, as I lie awake in the darkness, I wonder if tonight will be the night it steps fully into the light.